Welcome to 3 scary hospital stories. Number 1. The Night Nurse. Welcome to Riverwood, the administrator exclaimed, shaking the hand of the new night nurse. Riverwood was the town's only nursing home. It had been built as a hospital back in the early days of Millville. It was a grand 3-story building, built in an L shape. At the far west end of the building was a bell tower. It no longer sounded, the bell having been removed several years ago. It was on a slight hill overlooking the north end of the town and was surrounded by trees so thick that it was rumored that those who tried to escape or walk away got lost and were never found. Riverwood had been the place to take the aged and weary, or the sick and hopeless, for many years now. It was the place that many waited for their final breath. It was said that in the beginning of Riverwood, many bad experiments had taken place here. It was also said that many of them went wrong, very wrong. But those days had passed, and after several remodels and updates to the building and systems, Riverwood had become a modern, simple living center for those who needed constant care. "Thank you, sir," the young nurse said politely, pulling her hand back to herself. "I hope I can work here a long time. You will be working 3rd shift starting this Friday, on the 3rd floor, West Hall. Your assistant that night will be a young lady named Emily. She can give you the tour when you get here," the nurse said as they both rose from their seats and he walked her to the door. Once outside, she looked up at the building from the parking lot. "It's beautiful," she said to herself, "but it is a bit creepy." The place did seem to carry a bit of spookiness about it, but she was just relieved to have a job. These were hard times and she needed money, especially if she still planned on getting married in the spring. She had tried several nursing homes in other surrounding towns, but she didn't have any luck until she applied here. She gave one last look at the building before climbing into her station wagon and drove down the drive. She couldn't wait to tell her fiancé. "Hi," a voice came from behind her as she rounded the last flight of stairs to the 3rd floor. "You must be Nancy, the new night nurse." It was from a young girl, maybe a few years younger than herself. "My name is Emily," the girl said. "I'm your assistant. I'm taking classes to be a nurse, so until I pass my exams, I can only help." They walked the rest of the way together. Emily showed her the 3rd floor layout, where the restrooms were and of course the staff room. But since they worked 3rd shift, they would take their meals at their desk. They would be the only people in the entire West Hall. The 3rd floor West Hall was basically the hall where the extremely sick went. Each room was a sick room, and the smell that came down the hall was enough to make anyone gag, even if your stomach was made from granite. Emily's job was to basically keep the rooms clean from any messes that occurred from the patient, as well as attending to their basic needs, water, baths, feeding, etc. Nancy's job was to keep their medication going and deal with any major decisions that needed to be made. Within her first week, 2 of her patients had passed, and the 3rd had been on the verge of death, but she and the 3rd floor North Hall nurse had resuscitated the lady. The lady had cried the rest of the night, saying that it had been her time. The bell had told her so, and now they would be angry. Nancy was baffled at the lady, and had ended up giving her something to put her to sleep, just so that she would rest. One night, while taking a break at the desk, call lights, the lights outside a patient's door that are used to alert the nurse when attention is needed, began going off in vacant rooms. Upon inspection by both Nancy and Emily, the switches hadn't even been flipped. It was then that Emily spoke up. "If you think this is weird, just wait. You're still new here. Night shift is when the place really stretches its legs." "What do you mean?" asked Nancy. "Well, think about it. When you worked at a place like this, that has the history this one has, and the fact that most people who come here don't leave here alive, you're bound to have some spooks." "Well, there are plenty of them here," Emily said as they walked back to the nurse's desk. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't mean to scare you. You'll get used to it." They talked away the rest of the night, neither leaving the side of the other. Emily had explained Riverwood's history to Nancy, and though at many points it left her uneasy about her new job, she realized she needed to keep it, and a few spooks wouldn't make her quit. So, she kept at it, night after night, and even though there were always a few strange things that happened, Nancy was getting used to the place. But it was that winter that had created more of a problem for her. The snow was so thick in town that she couldn't even imagine how bad it was heading out to Riverwood. Nancy and her boyfriend lived a few miles away from Millville, in the small college community of Crestwood. She didn't have to drive clear across the county to get to work, but the snow made her choose to take the highway. Her car had almost slid off the road at least 3 times before she made it. When she had arrived that night to work, Half of the normal night shift, which was always minimal anyway, wasn't there yet. The radio that was playing was talking about the weather and how it was the worst snowstorm they had had in years. Blizzard was what they were saying. Nancy believed it. The snow was already almost waist deep. She was surprised that she had been able to make it in her station wagon. It was almost like something wanted her to be here. Okay, here's the plan. The charge nurse had walked over to her, making her rounds. We're all probably gonna be stuck here for a while, so you might call home if you need to inform anyone, before the phones go out. If the lights go out, the generator should stay on long enough for all of us to meet in the staff room. If that happens, I'll give further plans then. Find the flashlights for your hall. She had started to walk away when Nancy stopped her. What about Emily? Is she here yet? No, you'll have to go at it alone for a while. I'll try to get someone to come help you as soon as they can. If you need someone before that, just page me. With that, she disappeared beyond the doors. Nancy looked around her at the nurse's station and tried to sum up in her head all that needed to be done, since she would be doing 2 jobs at once. Then, after finding the flashlights, she placed one on her cart and headed down the dimly lit hallway. Everything had gone all right through her pill pass, except for the occasional flicker from the lights. A few times she had glanced out the windows to see how bad it was outside, but she couldn't really see past the window panes. It was a real whiteout out there. Walking back down the hallway, the lights flickered a few more times, and then went out with a buzzing sound. She stopped for a minute where she was standing, waiting for the generator to kick in. When she began to think that it wasn't, she started to walk down slowly to where she thought she had put the cart. A feeling came over her that made her stop again. She felt as though someone else was there with her in that hallway. Maybe it's the patients, she thought. They're wondering what happened. Go back to your rooms, she said. It's the storm. The power has gone out and the generator will be kicking in shortly. Even though she was saying it, she wasn't sure she believed it. It should have already had the lights back on. Whoever she had been talking to in the hallway must have heard her and went back to her room because she didn't feel the presence anymore. She did hear someone though. She could barely make it out in all the noise the storm was making outside, but she was sure she could hear a bell tolling. She started walking again, a little faster this time, trying to find her cart that had the flashlights on it. I told them they could have you, a voice said eerily down the corridor. She stopped and looked around in the darkness. She couldn't see anyone nor feel anyone. Go back to your room, she said in a slightly quivering voice. The lights will be on again in a minute. You took me from them when they came for me, so they're coming for you now, the voice said. Nancy listened for a minute and realized that it was the old lady they had brought back to life. Please go lie down and go to sleep, she pleaded. Tears were welling up in her eyes as she started to follow the wall down to the nurse's station. Each open doorway she passed made her heart skip. Then she heard it again, the tolling of the bell. She could feel a draft sweeping across her face as if someone had opened a window somewhere. The cold against her cheeks were like icy fingers on her skin. She only wished Emily was here with her. It would have made her feel a little better. She came to another open doorway and began to slink past when something in the darkness grabbed her and pulled her into it. They would have never heard her scream because the darkness had filled up her lungs and enveloped her. Moments later, the generator kicked in and the lights finally came back on. After the storm had ceased and the plows had begun to make their way through ice and snow, a noise had alerted the other nurses that Nancy was missing. It was the ringing of the bell that no longer existed. Several of the nurses had made their way back up to the bell tower to see what was going on, when they found her hanging from a rope. As the wind hit her dangling legs, her head hit the bell, making it ring and reverberating across the hills. They said they heard a high-pitched laugh as the air around them became like ice-cold fingers. Story number 2. Abandoned Hospital. It all started when John and James, the twins, had come over to my house and explained their plan to me. When they gathered our 2 other friends, Lucy and Zoe, they explained the plan to them. The plan was to sneak into an old abandoned hospital, take some photos, and then get out of there before we got caught. We left our house at 10 p.m., and we met up at the park that is by all of our houses. When we were all at the park, we made sure we had all of our supplies, and we put James in charge of taking the photos. We then headed on our way to the hospital. It took us about 20 minutes of walking in the dark to reach the hospital, but when we finally got there, it was all worth it. We crawled in through a broken window and begun our adventure. But what we didn't know is that it was going to end very poorly. The girls were a little scared, while the twins were acting all tough and brave to impress them. We had been walking through the hallways of the hospital for about 15 minutes when Zoe noticed that the twins weren't with us. We had all gotten a little scared, especially when we heard them scream. We ran through the hallways aimlessly, searching for them, when we found blood. The smell was awful, and it was everywhere. It was on the ground, the walls, and I think I even saw some of it on the ceiling. There was a trail of blood that led into a room, so we followed it. In the room was John laying on the ground, lifeless. We all ran out in a panic. Maybe we could get some help, we had thought, but when we got to the doors, they wouldn't open. No matter how much strength we put into it, they would not open. We turned around to go and find the broken window we got in through, when there was a figure, covered in blood. The figure had laughed when it saw how scared all three of us were. Lucy tried to ask what it wanted, but it just laughed more when it heard the fear in our voice. The figure walked closer and closer. It had a knife in its hand. Not just any knife, but one covered in blood. The figure approached Lucy and Zoe, who were huddled together, and it killed them. It just stabbed and sliced away at them while they screamed. It held them in place to where they couldn't run at all, and all I did was stand there, frozen in my spot, unable to move. I had finally got the courage to run out of there and find the broken window. I ran down the street as fast as I could until I got here. I just wish that my friends would have survived too, I said to the cops as I finished my story. But James survived, remember? He arrived a couple of minutes after you, and he's been telling his side of the story to another cop. The man in front of me told me as I smiled at the good news. Another cop walked into the room and whispered something into the ear of the cop who was questioning me. He then handed him some photos that were smeared with blood. He looked at the photos, wiped off some of the blood to get a closer look, and then looked up at me. He kept looking at the photos and then at me. "What's going on?" I asked, ready for answers. The cop didn't say anything and just pulled out some handcuffs. He walked behind me and made me stand up as he put the handcuffs on me, saying, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law," so on and so forth. "What's going on? Why are you handcuffing me? I didn't do anything," I screamed at the cops. The cop that had entered the room with the photos said that James had told him everything, and that the proof was all in the photos. He also said that those were photos that James had taken while they were in the hospital. I looked down at the photos on the table and couldn't believe what I saw. The figure. It was me. Story number 3. Red Eye Flight. Live the dream. These words flashed before Caitlin Neal's closed eyes on her red-eye flight back to LA. It wasn't home, but her so-called base. Her name wasn't even Caitlin Neal. Nevertheless, as the company had promised her, she had come to like both, until now. "Hello, this is your captain speaking. We should be at LAX soon. ETA 3 a.m. The witching hour." Where had she heard that? In her half-sleep, half-drunk state, Caitlin didn't care. Not Caitlin, Carol. She knew that. She did her various agents. The thing was, she was supposed to forget. Along with the slogan that had just registered on Caitlin's groggy radar screen, so did this one. "We like you." Did they really? Madeline from PR, her first and foremost handler, had certainly said so. "You've got potential," she'd enthused with an ear-to-ear grin at their first meeting. "I know, lots of people say that, and lots of people hear that. Yet you have that extra something special that puts you several cuts above the rest. Too bad no one else noticed. They don't care. Am I right?" "Well," Carol Nonigar had countered, "1 year ago to the day, I wouldn't say no one." "Who've you got?" "My supervisor. She'd been good to me at the dentist office. Co-workers too, who are finding me more and more indispensable as our new hires get less and less reliable. Millennials and Gen Z." Madeline had grimaced in sympathy. "Where all the extras go? Many have come here. What exactly are you offering?" "A total makeover. Plastic surgery. Natch, but also a new lease on life. In fact, a new one." Carol had blinked hard. "Beg your pardon?" "Relax, you're not coming back from the dead." Madeline's high, tinkling laugh had bubbled right through Carol's blood and bones to the soul within. "Here at Like, we're all about transformation. Not only will you get top-of-the-line cosmetic procedures, but a new name and occupation. In fact, after you fill out the second scenario questionnaire, you'll get the job you've always wanted. A New York Times best-selling author? If it's in the metric, you bet." Madeline had paused, tipping her hands into a pyramid. "Something tells me dental receptionist wasn't what you dreamed of being when you were 5 years old. Or 42, however, I'm still paying off my student loans." For what degree? Seeing that the older woman had bowed her head in shame, Madeline waited. Creative writing. Ouch. Madeline's own Gen Z colleague said it, but she figured that wouldn't turn Carol off. I have a feeling that won't pan out unless you have a little help. That's where we come in. Our likability career counselors will make sure that you have the best fit for your highest ambitions. Now you're talking. Then Carol had made her wait. How much will all this cost? 50 grand at the outset. But I told you you're special. For only $10,000 we'll foot the rest of the bill. I'm serious. We've never met a woman with such promise before. In the past, all our clients were, Madeline had lowered her voice, rich white male assholes. With their money and prestige, they could have bought a whole ski resort and retired early. But no, they had to take the Faust route. Fast route and go for the gold one more time. Gigantic eye roll. Not you, Miss Nottinger. You've never ever had silver or bronze, am I right? Carol had nodded, her eyes wet. Got a family, partner, children, friends who mean more to you than a monthly lunch date? 4 shakes of her head. Carol had tried not to look pathetic, but knew she already failed. Thus, she signed on the dotted line, and been wheeled off to surgery before she could say fine print. In truth, she hadn't cared about it. She knew she should have, but in the heat of the moment, strapped to the gurney and full of more adrenaline than she had surged through in her years, let the whys and wherefores be damned. She'd be the person she always knew she could become. They grinned and embraced her. They grinned as they washed every inch of her year-old form. They grinned as they read her some pamphlet about doorways and transitions and whatnot. They grinned as she thrashed on the gurney, suddenly having a bad reaction to what she heard. They grinned as the needle pierced her skin, preparing her for true rebirth, where she'd be eternally. Just wanted to throw in a quick little update at the end of the video. Yeah, I've been thinking about what direction I want this channel to go in at this point. There's a huge influx of people coming over from TikTok and everything, but I think I want to take this channel into more of a horror way, whether that be storytelling like this video or horror games like I've done before in the past, which you can check out. I'll link one after this. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.